Hello, everyone. I hope you enjoyed conducting the Solaris and STAR negotiations. And if you're accidentally watching this before having done them, stop this video now and go do them because these are intended as debrief slides. Now, as you know, we're going to be building on the foundations. We worked with New Recruit last week to better understand what kinds of issues pop up in negotiations. And it turns out that some are structured differently than others. And you have to be aware of what the structural elements of your negotiation are in order to best approach them. So in particular, and by the way, I would encourage you to think about the negotiation analysis that you did or article that you read last week as part of this, and also to be thinking about the claiming value, creating value spectrum. I asked you to read a creating value pre-article, and that would be fodder for consideration for this as well. So as a refresher, there are two key terms introduced here, and you've heard them: integrative and distributive negotiations. On the left-hand side over here, you have what appears to be a smaller pie with existing value that if you're clever, you can make bigger so that you create value first, and then it's about claiming value. And those are the case in integrative negotiations where you can make the pie bigger, that is, create value. On the other hand, some negotiations are just structured as distributive. So you're only able to distribute or claim the value inherent in what already exists. So the question is, how would you characterize Solaris and STAR? Knowing that these two are considered fundamental negotiations, I assigned these in particular to help you think about the difference between the two. So which one appeared to have only one issue to work with? And that would be the distributive one. Okay, so STAR had integrative properties, while Solaris, on the other hand, had only distributive properties. And the reason for that is that Solaris only allowed you to negotiate the price of the company, whereas STAR, if you thought about it, it started out to seem to be artistic control, which was a bumping or sticking point, because it seemed that people just had incompatible issues or incompatible perspectives on that. So it was up to you to be clever and inject new information into play, that is, to share information enough to figure out how to make it work anyway. So we'll talk about that shortly. So STAR was integrative. So if you look, just to give you a little bit more detail, creating value is technically win-win. The goal is mutual and individual gain. There are usually multiple issues, and very often you're dealing with a long-term relationship. So you care very much that you're not just trying to take from that other person. You're trying to get more value for both of you. On the other hand, you have claiming value, which typically is win-lose at that point, because for every bit you gain, the other person loses in measure. The goal typically is individual gain, and very often it's a single issue and no future relationship. So people often think, for example, of cars as mostly distributive because it's mostly about the price of the car. But even there, you might well inject a little bit more value or create it by talking about like financing or adding features that may not be very expensive for the dealer to include, that adds value for you. It's not very costly to them. So again, STAR is integrative, but a lot of people bump up against that and can't figure out how to get by the lack of artistic control compatibility. Okay, now the telltale signs of win-win potential, what are they? Because what's going to happen is you'll go into any negotiation and you may think it's just distributive by nature because it seems like you're just negotiating one thing, like an office. You're choosing an office. And so it just seems to be about the office that you can choose versus other things that issues might be injected into that. So you've got to go in and think, okay, it looks like this might be distributive, but can I add value or create value so that we both get more before distributing? Excuse me. And one, here are the telltale signs of win-win potential. So does the negotiation contain more than one issue? Many start off that way, but it's realized that more issues can be at play. And do the parties have different preferences across the negotiation issues? It's these differences in preferences, beliefs, and capacities that can be profitably traded off to create the gain. So, for example, the big kicker, so to speak, with Star is that it turns out that one of the record companies assumes the presence of only one record, while the other does not. So in one case, one company assumes one record, one company assumes the other. So what happens is your only real way to make Star work is by having Pacific create the first record, because it only expects to create one, and then releasing Star, so Sarah and Trace and Arthur, to Heffen to be reunited with Robin with Heffen, and then Heffen is expecting to create a second album. So it's a matter of timing and the fact that you're dealing with expectations around number of records. So very often people think that conflict management and negotiation is really about finding common ground. But also, that is the case, but also if a smart negotiator will realize that differences allow you to have those trade-offs. And we saw that with New Recruit. It turned out that the recruiter and candidate value different things, and so you were able to trade off of those profitably to make the pie bigger. Okay, and then can other issues be brought in? Okay, so here's what works. When you're thinking about trying to create value, and this could be going into almost any negotiation with your home builder, with whom you seem to be having issues staying within budget. It could be as you go to negotiate a customer service issue problem that you're having. It could be, the case of Star. So you're trying to think about, what do I do to prepare to make this work? And pardon me, it's having trouble clicking. So number one is perspective taking. It's not empathy, which is more about feeling what the other party feels, but really trying to put yourself in that other party's shoes and viewing their world as they would see it, because that allows you to be more clever and analyze their interests. So then what you're doing is searching for differences. So as one example, I mentioned The Office. And so you can look at the relative importance of issues. Say you're figuring out with a colleague who is going to get an office space, and you talk about it and you learn, well, one of us cares very much about the size of the office, while the other one says, I just want a really nice view. So what you do, you have office space. It turns out one is big, and then one has windows. So you can then divvy them up, because it turns out size of the office really wasn't a big factor that people often think it is. Expectations for the future when they differ. So an example of that is a brother and a sister who inherit a tool store. So in this case, they talk about it, and the sister expects a steady decline in the revenues, while the brother expects solid growth. So they're trying to figure out who's going to take over the store. So the obvious solution in this case is that the brother, who expects great growth, buys the sister out at the net present value of those declining revenues as she sees them over time. So he gets a good deal, and she relinquishes control of the business. Risk preferences. You figure out who is more risk averse, who is more risk seeking. So if you had two book authors, it turns out one is risk averse, and so that person takes the advance money, because that way they get the money in pocket. It's kind of a done deal. The risk-seeking author says, no, I want to go for it, and so I'm going to take my compensation in the way of profits or royalties. Another thing to think about is differences in time orientation. So two partners in a joint venture might offer initial profits to the shorter term, higher cost of time partner, while the other one gets to wait for the greater profit over time as it ramps up. So it's just who needs the money when. And then differences in capability. So say you're trying to figure out how to employ people to do new product design. So one manager has great quantitative skills and the other has great marketing design skills. So those two people should be different. So they should both be part of the team, excuse me, because they both have different capabilities. I'm going to go ahead and stop this video and start a new one and cough myself into oblivion.